He raised his hand and, with a heavy heart, ordered the execution, the punishment demanded by law. The nail was driven into his son's head, sealing not only the prince's fate, but his own. The sound of the nail striking echoed in the stillness, a sound that would haunt King Nemeka forever. Prince Obinna fell, lifeless, to the ground. The king's eyes burned with grief, but he shed no tears. He stood motionless, his heart an empty void. Once, in a small village called Omelora, surrounded by green hills and tall trees, there lived people who were happy and content. The village was peaceful. Every morning, the sun would rise over the Omu hills, bringing warmth to the land. The people worked hard on their farms, planted crops, and took care of their animals. Everyone knew everyone else, and life was simple. Children, Chinidu, Amaka, Ifunanya, and Little Tobe, ran through the narrow dirt paths, laughing and playing games. The elders, Matsi Kalu, Elder Yuzo, and Mama Nena, sat under the shade of trees, telling stories of the old days. There was always something to do, whether it was fetching water from the well or weaving baskets by the fire. The village was small, but it was full of life. The sound of cows mooing, goats bleating, and chickens clucking filled the air. The smell of fresh food being cooked drifted from each house, from Mama Ejima's kitchen, from Nwakigo's hearth, and the smoke from cooking fires curled up into the sky. In the mornings, the villagers gathered at Yukala Market to trade their goods. Mama Ebra sold baskets of fruits and vegetables. Dauda traded fish and grains. The air was filled with friendly chatter, and children ran between the tables, laughing and helping their parents. There was always a sense of togetherness, as if everyone was part of the same family. It was a life built on tradition, respect, and a deep connection to the earth. The village was a place where nothing much ever changed, and everyone believed it would always be this way. But peace, as they say, doesn't last forever. In the village of Omelora, trust was the foundation of life. Yukala Market, a simple place under a few large irako and aqua trees, was a perfect example of how everything worked. Goods were laid out with price tags clearly attached. Yams, baskets, herbs, and even live geese. Villagers didn't need to stand by their wares or watch over them. If someone needed something, they would come, see the price tag, take what they needed, and leave the exact amount of money in its place. The market worked like this every day. It was normal for people to leave their goods behind as they went about their business. Mama Ebra and Nwakigo would leave their baskets of fruits or vegetables while they visited friends such as Mama Nena or attended to other tasks. Farmers such as Pa Uver and Ikin the blacksmith would go to their fields, leaving behind tools and harvested crops, knowing that no one would touch them. As long as the price tag was there, anyone who wanted to buy the goods would simply take them and leave the proper payment. Even beyond the market, life in Omelora was just as peaceful. Matsi Kalu and Elder Yuzo would often leave their homes wide open while they worked in the fields or visited neighbors such as Mama Ejima or Dauda the trader. Doors would remain unlocked and nothing would be touched. No one ever worried about losing anything. The village was built on respect and trust, and this was reflected in every action. The yam barns, such as Abadike's large barn near the Ego Stream, where crops were stored after harvest, stood open. No locks, no closed doors. The harvested yams were left out in the open, just as they were brought in, untouched by anyone. In the same way, after cooking meals, Chisholm or Mama Ebro would often leave their food inside the house while stepping outside for a moment. The doors would remain wide open, and the food, left unattended, was never disturbed. The children of the village, Chinidu, Amaka, Ifunanya, and Little Tobe, would leave their toys in the yard while they played outside, knowing they'd be just where they left them when they returned. In Omelora, it was impossible to imagine stealing. No one ever thought to take anything that wasn't theirs. It wasn't a matter of rules. It was simply how the village worked. Everyone understood the value of honesty, and there was a deep, unspoken agreement that no one would take advantage of another. In every corner of Omelora, people went about their lives with complete trust in each other. From Yukala Market to the open fields, from the homes to the riverbanks by the Ego Stream, There was a sense of peace that came from knowing everyone respected one another. There were no guards, no locks, no reason for fear. It was simply how things had always been. One day, two strangers, Ikena and Godia, came to the village of Omelora from a nearby settlement called Obuala. They were curious about the peaceful way of life the villagers lived. As they wandered through Omelora, they noticed the openness, the market where goods were left unattended, the unlocked doors, the yam barns left open after harvest, and the trust everyone had in one another. It seemed like a perfect place, a place of peace, a place of vulnerability. The strangers saw an opportunity and decided to return to their own village. They told their brothers about the wealth of peace and trust in Omelora, and soon enough, they returned with more people. 20 strangers, all eager to take advantage of the village's kindness. They were welcomed with warmth and hospitality, as Mama Nena, Elder Yuzo, and Matsi Kalu always treated newcomers with openness. No one suspected anything wrong, as it was not in their nature to think ill of others. But as time passed, the strangers' true intentions began to surface. They began to steal. Little by little, things disappeared from Yukala Market: goats, baskets, grains. No one suspected that the very people they had welcomed into their village were the ones taking what didn't belong to them. The villagers were confused. They had never known theft before. At first, they thought it was a mistake, that someone had simply misplaced their things. But soon, the theft became too frequent to ignore. People started to lose their homes, small items like clothes, tools, and even cooking pots vanished overnight. The once peaceful and trusting community was shaken. The elders, including Abadike and Matsi Kalu, gathered in a panic, but no one knew who to blame. The strangers had blended in so well, and no one suspected them. What was once a tight-knit village where trust was the rule was now being torn apart by deceit. The villagers watched in horror as their way of life began to unravel. They lost their goats, their tools, their crops, and their very sense of peace. And with each loss, their trust in one another slowly faded, like a dying ember. The village, once a sanctuary of innocence, had become a place where the shadow of theft now lingered, and the community they had once known seemed to slip further away. It was early in the morning, just as the first light of day began to peek through the trees. The women of Omelora, Chisholm, Mama Ejima, Adiz, and Ngozi walked down the narrow path that led to the Ego stream. Each woman carried a local pot, ready to fill it with fresh water for the day. The cool air and the quiet hum of the morning made it seem like any other day. They didn't expect anything out of the ordinary. As they filled their pots, the women talked quietly among themselves, enjoying the peaceful moment. But that peace didn't last long. Just as they were preparing to leave, a group of men, led by Tiga and his accomplices Okoro, Shedrach, and Luca, suddenly appeared from the shadows of the trees. They looked rough, their faces hidden in the early morning mist. Before the women could even react, the men grabbed them, pulling them away from the stream. There was no time to scream, no time to run. They were caught off guard, helpless in the face of their attackers. The women fought, but the men were too strong. They cried out, their voices echoing across the quiet stream, but it was no use. The men did what they wanted and then left as quickly as they came, leaving the women trembling, their eyes filled with tears. Shocked and broken, the women slowly made their way back to Omelora, their baskets and pots hanging loosely in their hands, forgotten for the moment. The weight of what had happened pressed heavily on their hearts. Early in the morning, while the sun was just beginning to rise, a woman named Nwakigo woke up excited. She had a basket filled with goods, things she hoped to sell at Yukala Market that day. She carefully placed her goods, her precious goose, into the basket and set off toward the market. Her heart was light as she thought of the money she could earn. She was looking forward to what the day would bring. But as she walked closer to the market, something terrible happened. A group of thieves, the same men from the stream, now joined by Danjuma and Kalapo, appeared out of nowhere. They stepped in front of her, blocking her way. She tried to move around them, but they were quick, and they grabbed her basket. They took her goods, her goose, and the money she had saved for the day. The woman cried out for help, but there was no one around to hear her. Feeling helpless, she stood there for a moment, not knowing what to do. The thieves quickly took what they wanted and walked away, leaving her standing alone on the path. Slowly, Nwakigo began to walk back to Omelora. Her head hung low and her heart felt heavy. She had no goods to sell, no money to make, and no idea what to do next. Her once hopeful day had turned into one of loss and sadness. And so, with a defeated spirit, she made her way back home to the village. It was late in the evening when the thieves crept toward the house at the edge of Omelora. The house belonged to Pa Uver and his wife, Mama Oluchi. It stood alone, far from the other homes, surrounded by tall grass and trees. Inside, Pa Uver and Mama Oluchi were settling down for the night, unaware of the danger lurking outside. The thieves, Tiga, Okoro, Shedrach, Luca, Danjuma, and Kalapo, moved quietly, like shadows in the dark. They had come for Pa Uver's goods, just as they had taken from so many others. But this time, it wasn't going to be so easy. As they approached the house, Pa Uver heard the soft rustling of footsteps. He quickly got up, his heart racing. He could see dark figures slipping past the window, moving toward his barn. Without a moment to lose, Pa Uver rushed outside, shouting to protect his belongings. But the thieves weren't afraid. They turned quickly, surrounding him, and a fierce struggle broke out under the moonlight. Pa Uver fought with all his strength, but he was outnumbered. The thieves grabbed hold of him, and before he could do anything more, one of them struck him down. Pa Uver fell to the ground with a heavy thud, his body still. Mama Oluchi, hearing the commotion, rushed outside. She saw her husband lying motionless on the ground, his face pale, and she cried out in despair. The thieves, having taken what they wanted, quickly fled into the night, leaving the woman alone in the darkness with her grief. Mama Oluchi knelt beside her husband, her tears falling onto his lifeless body. She couldn't believe what had just happened. In the space of a few moments, her world had been torn apart. And so, with a heart broken from the loss of her husband, Mama Oluchi stumbled back to Omelora, crying out for help. The night was quiet, but her sobs echoed through the empty streets as she made her way to King Nemeka I, desperate for justice. It was another dark and quiet night in the village. The stars glittered in the sky, and the breeze rustled through the trees. The villagers slept soundly in their homes, unaware of what was happening in their fields. The thieves moved quietly through Omelora, their faces hidden in the darkness. They crept from farm to farm, sneaking past fences and walking between the crops. They had come for the harvest. At one farm, they cut plantains, their sharp knives slicing through the thick, green leaves. The plantains fell to the ground with a soft thud. At another farm, they dug up yams from the ground, pulling the tubers free from the soil. They grabbed all they could carry, their bags filling up with the stolen crops. But they didn't stop there. They knew where else they could take more. They moved silently to the yam barns, where the villagers kept their stored yams. They broke open the barn doors, and inside, they found sacks of yams piled high. With practiced hands, they began to load the yams into their bags, making sure to take as many as they could carry. The thieves worked fast, knowing they had to finish before anyone noticed. Next, they headed toward the animal farm owned by Ikin the blacksmith. The sound of the animals was soft and peaceful in the night, but that didn't stop the thieves. They slipped into the pen where the goats and chickens were kept. The thieves moved quickly, pulling the animals out of their pens and slipping them into sacks. The animals struggled, but the thieves were swift, taking goats, chickens, and whatever they could find. The thieves moved quickly, knowing they had to finish their work before the first light of dawn. They took everything they could find: yams, plantains, corn, vegetables from the gardens, and even animals from the pens. They left nothing behind. The fields left barren and empty, and the barns emptied of their food and animals. As the thieves disappeared into the night, the village remained silent. The moon cast a faint glow on the empty fields, but no one knew what had been taken. When the sun finally rose the next morning, the villagers began to wake up. They went out to their farms to check on their crops, but as they walked into the fields, their hearts sank. The crops they had worked so hard to grow were gone. The plantains were cut, the yams were missing, and the gardens were bare. The villagers hurried to the yam barns, but the doors were wide open. The yams were gone, everything was gone. They ran to the animal pens, but the goats and chickens were nowhere to be found. Their hearts sank further as they realized the thieves had stolen their animals too. The villagers gathered together, shocked and confused. Who could have done this? They asked each other, their faces filled with worry. They looked at the empty fields, the bare barns, and the empty animal pens. "We've lost everything," one villager whispered. There was fear in the air now. The thieves had stolen more than food. They had taken what the villagers depended on to live. The loss felt heavy, like a shadow hanging over Omelora. The villagers knew they had to do something. The thieves had stolen their food and their livelihood, and now their lives were even harder. The village square of Omelora was thick with the sound of weeping as the villagers gathered before King Nemekai's hall. Each person carried the weight of loss. Bundles of stolen goods clutched tightly in their hands. Faces marked by sorrow and disbelief filled the space, and the king's heart tightened with each desperate plea. One woman, Mama Nena, stepped forward, her voice cracking as she spoke. "Your Majesty, they took everything. My yam barn is empty. The crops I've spent years tending, gone in a night." A man with stooped shoulders, Dowda the traitor, followed, his voice rough with grief. "I had 2 goats, both gone. How are we to feed our families now?" King Nemeka sat motionless, his gaze lost in thought. His mind raced, but no answer came. He had always prided himself on the peace his village had known, the trust that flourished between its people. Yet now, that trust was shattered, and his people were asking him for justice. I understand your pain." The king finally spoke, his voice strained but resolute. "But we cannot act hastily. I need time to consider this carefully." His hands gripped the arms of his throne. "I will meet with my elders. Together, we will find a solution that is just." The villagers, their faces still soaked with tears, exchanged uneasy glances. They wanted answers now. They wanted retribution. But the king was not yet ready to act on their grief. "I will speak to you again soon," he continued. "Go back to your homes, and know that we will find a way forward." Reluctantly, the villagers bowed and began to leave, their footsteps heavy with frustration, still murmuring prayers of hope as they went. Meanwhile, as the villagers dispersed, the thieves, Tiga, Okoro, Shedrach, Luka, Danjuma, Kalapo, Ikena, and Godia, moved swiftly through the shadows outside the village. They knew they had to move quickly, as Omelora had become a place where their actions would soon be discovered. They carried baskets filled with stolen yams, dried fish, and other goods, making their way toward a nearby village called Obuala. They could not afford to sell the stolen food in Omelora itself. They feared being caught by someone who would recognize them or report them to the king. Instead, they made their way to their relatives in Obuala, people Bako and Salihu, offering the stolen goods for sale. Their plan was simple. Their relatives would sell the items there, and they would receive the money in return, far from the eyes of Omelora's residents. The thieves knew they were gambling with time. If the king's people discovered the truth, they would have no place to hide. But for now, they moved quickly and quietly, trusting that their relatives would help them get the goods sold before anyone could trace the stolen items back to them. The royal hall was tense with the weight of King Nemekai's decisions. After hearing the voices of the villagers, the king summoned his chiefs, Elder Abadike, Elder Yuzo, and Matsi Kalu, to a meeting, hoping to find a solution to the growing fear that had settled over Omelora. The plan was simple. A group of vigilantes would patrol the village at night to protect the people from the thieves who had been stealing goods, particularly the precious geese. "These thieves must be stopped," the king said, his voice firm. "We must ensure the safety of our people. The vigilantes will patrol every night, armed and ready." The chiefs agreed, and 10 men were chosen for the task. Among them were Ikena, Obesai, Chijiok, Nduka, Okachukwu, Kalechi, Aneo, Ifani, Uchenna, and Samto. They were given machetes and knives to protect themselves and the village. For a few nights, everything seemed calm. The vigilantes walked the streets, keeping watch, but nothing out of the ordinary occurred. However, one night, under the veil of darkness, the thieves decided to strike. They had been stealing from the village for weeks, and they were determined to continue their raids. As the vigilantes patrolled the village, the thieves ambushed them. The clash was brutal. In the chaos, 5 of the vigilantes, Chijioke, Nduka, Okachukwu, Kalechi, and Aneo were killed. The thieves fought fiercely, and in the process, one of them, Ikena the thief, who had been carrying the stolen goose, was also killed. By morning, the villagers found the bodies of the fallen vigilantes and the thief who had been carrying the goose. The villagers, in shock and mourning, gathered the bodies and brought them to the king's palace. When King Nemeka saw the bodies of the vigilantes and the thief, a deep sadness washed over him. His strategy had failed. The very men he had sent to protect the village had been slaughtered, and the hope of peace seemed further out of reach. The people gathered in the courtyard, their faces filled with grief and confusion. The king stood before them, his heart heavy with the weight of the failure. He had hoped that these vigilantes could restore peace to the village, but now the situation had only become more dire. His plan had backfired, and now 5 of the 10 vigilantes were dead, and the village was left wondering what the future held. The village had never felt so heavy. The air, once filled with the sounds of laughter and communal work, was now thick with fear. The thieves, emboldened by their previous victories, grew bolder with each passing day. What had started as isolated acts of theft was now a plague on the entire village. It began in the markets. Women selling their goods found themselves under attack. The thieves, now joined by the village's young boys, such as Ibuka, Samson, and Obina the rogue, who, driven by hunger and desperation, had turned to crime, patrolled the markets, demanding money from anyone they encountered. The market women had no choice but to comply, lest they face violence. One morning, a woman named Mama Akamaka, who sold cassava and plantains, had just finished setting up her stall when a group of the thieves appeared, swaggering through the marketplace. Their faces were hard, their eyes full of malice. They approached her, their voices low but threatening. "Pay us, or we'll make you pay in another way," growled Obina the rogue, his hand resting on the hilt of a knife. Mama Akamaka, trembling, looked around, but no one dared intervene. "I don't have much," she said, her voice shaking. "Just let me be." Obina's face twisted with impatience. "Pay us, or we take everything," he snapped. When she hesitated, Obina lunged forward, grabbing her by the arm and yanking her roughly from her stall. The market froze in shock, but no one moved. The thieves were known now, and their power had grown. But just as the situation seemed ready to explode, Matsi Kalu arrived, drawn by the commotion. His hands were firm on his staff as he made his way through the crowd. "Release her," he commanded, his voice strong and authoritative. For a moment, the thieves paused, sizing up the chief. Then, in a swift motion, they attacked. Mama Okamaka screamed as Ibuka shoved her aside and turned on Matsi Kalu. Within seconds, Matsi Kalu was on the ground, bloodied and struggling. Mama Okamaka, too, was struck again, her cries joining the confusion in the air. The market erupted into chaos. People began running, pushing and shoving to escape, but there was nowhere to run. The thieves controlled every corner of the market, their power and violence growing with each passing day. The next morning, word spread quickly through the village. There had been more kidnappings. Children, men, and women alike had been taken from their homes. Some were released after ransom was paid. Others were never seen again. Fear took hold of the villagers, and many began to flee, leaving their homes, their families, everything they had known. The streets grew emptier, the once vibrant village now resembling a ghost town. Those who remained were too terrified to speak out. They lived in silence, huddled in their homes, unsure of what would happen next. The village had become unrecognizable, overrun by the very people they had once trusted. King Nemeka, watching this descent into madness, realized that the village was slipping beyond his control. There was no law left, no order to keep the people safe. And though his mind raced with thoughts of what to do, one thing was certain: he had lost his grip on the village, and with it, the hope of ever returning to peace. It started with smoke. A quiet night gave way to the sudden roar of fire. The thieves came like shadows, slipping past the village's sleeping corners. They targeted a man named Pa, known throughout Omelora for his kindness. He lived quietly on the edge of the village with his wife, Chisholm. They beat him without mercy. He fought back, but they were too many. His cries were swallowed by the flames as they set his yam barn ablaze. Then his house. The fire painted the sky red. Its smoke spiraled toward the stars. By dawn, Pa was at the palace gate, barefoot, ash-covered, shaking. His clothes were torn. His voice cracked with sorrow as he fell to the ground before King Nemekai. They've burned everything, my barn, my house, everything I have gone. The king stood by the window, staring at the curling smoke in the distance. His eyes narrowed. That smoke wasn't just fire, it was insult, it was pain, it was a message. He clenched his fists, silent. But fate was not finished with that morning. Just as the elders were called to the palace for urgent counsel, another blow landed. A servant named Obina, breathless, burst through the throne room doors. My king, the princess. Everyone turned. The king's heart skipped. She went to the stream, and they... The words wouldn't come. They attacked her. The queen's guards fought back, but 2 are gravely injured. They were overpowered. They raped Princess Nkiru. Silence. A cruel, frozen silence filled the room. The air grew heavy, and all eyes turned to the king. Then came soft footsteps. Princess Nkiru appeared, walking slowly, escorted by the wounded guards, Okafor and Chittybeer. Her dress was torn, her face numb. Her hands trembled. When her eyes met her father's, they filled with tears. She tried to speak but broke down, falling into his arms. The king caught her, wrapping her tightly in his arms. His face stayed strong, but his spirit shattered. A sound escaped him. Not a cry, not a word, but something deeper. A growl of heartbreak. Of fury. He looked at his elders, Elder Abadike, Elder Yuzo, and Matsikalu. His voice low, shaking with power. What they have taken from us is more than homes or barns. They have stolen peace. They have defiled the sacred. He rose to his feet, lifting the princess gently. This land will not rot under my watch. We will rise. We will answer. And in that moment, the elders knew. This wasn't just the end of peace. It was the beginning of reckoning. The king's voice broke through the tension, his tone firm and filled with urgency. This meeting is over for now, he commanded. I need to take my daughter to the doctor. We'll resume our discussion later this evening. The elders exchanged glances, a heavy silence filling the room. Without another word, the king swiftly left, his face tight with concern for his daughter. He hurried through the palace halls, the weight of his anger and fear pressing on his chest. He escorted his daughter to the home of Dr. Ifidiora, the village healer. The streets seemed eerily quiet, reflecting the turmoil swirling in his heart. Once he had safely left her in the doctor's care, the king walked back to the palace, his steps more purposeful now, the gravity of the situation pulling him toward his duty. The evening meeting with the elders was waiting, and the outcome would decide the fate of their kingdom. When he arrived, the room was filled with an unsettling energy. The elders sat in tense silence, some lost in thought, others fidgeting with unease. It was clear they hadn't reached a conclusion yet. The debates had gone on for hours, the voices of anger and frustration rising and falling with no resolution in sight. Finally, Elder Abadike stood, his face lined with experience and determination. His voice cut through the room like a knife. We cannot let this continue. We cannot be soft. If we show mercy, we lose control. The best way to stop them is to make an example. We must drive fear into their hearts. Anyone caught stealing, hurting the innocent, we will drive a nail into the center of their head. We will show no mercy. The room fell deathly quiet. The king's heart pounded in his chest, but he knew the elder was right. His daughter's pain, the rapes, the violence, it all led to this. They had to stop it. They had to make sure no one dared commit such atrocities again. After a long pause, the king spoke, his voice low but filled with unshakable resolve. I agree. This is the only way to restore peace. One by one, the elders nodded, some reluctantly, others with grim satisfaction. They all knew the severity of the decision, but the reality of their kingdom's safety could not be ignored. The king wasted no time. He ordered Dowda the town crier to spread the news. Early the next morning, he would go throughout the village, commanding everyone to gather in the evening. The king had something important to announce, something that would change everything. As dawn broke the next day, the town crier began his rounds, his voice echoing through the streets, carrying the weight of the king's decree. Gather in the evening. The king has something important to tell you. By the time the sun began to set, the villagers had gathered in the town square, an uneasy tension thick in the air. Faces were drawn, murmurs rippling through the crowd as everyone wondered what the king would say. When the king finally stepped forward, the hush that fell over the crowd was palpable. His presence was commanding, but it was the coldness in his eyes that struck fear into the hearts of all who stood before him. People of Omelora, the king began, his voice steady but harsh, the time for leniency is over. Our land has been ravaged by thieves and criminals. No longer will we tolerate this destruction. If you are caught stealing, if you harm another, you will face the ultimate punishment. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the air like a heavy fog. He looked out over the crowd, meeting the fearful eyes of every villager. We will take a large nail and drive it into the center of your head. This will be your fate if you break the law. We will show no mercy. The silence was deafening. The villagers stood frozen, their hearts gripped by fear. The king's words echoed in their minds, the image of the punishment far too real to ignore. As the king finished speaking, the crowd remained still, each person too afraid to even breathe. Slowly, the villagers began to disperse, their heads down, their hearts heavy. Fear hung in the air like a thick fog. Every step toward home feeling like the weight of the king's decree followed them. They couldn't help but wonder what would happen if they were ever in the wrong place at the wrong time. The consequences were too severe, too final, and as they walked home, the thought of the king's judgment loomed over them. Would they ever be the one to face the nail? Would they live in constant fear, knowing that one mistake could cost them their life? The king sat at his royal desk, his fingers tapping the worn wood with rhythmic tension. The village had been plagued by thieves for weeks, and his heart grew heavier with each passing day. The trust once shared had been shattered. The peaceful days seemed like a distant memory, replaced by fear, loss, and uncertainty. With a heavy sigh, King Nemeka made his decision. He called for the elders to gather. His voice was firm but burdened with the weight of what had to be done. I'll send for the young men of the village, the king declared. They will lead the fight to protect our land. The elders nodded in agreement, and orders were quickly carried out. 20 of the strongest, most reliable young men were chosen from Omelora. Word spread quickly, and the surrounding villages were soon alerted. The king sent messengers far and wide, asking for any willing volunteers to join the effort to protect their homes from the thieves who had terrorized them. Soon, 30 men arrived from neighboring villages, ready to fight. They were armed with machetes, axes, and whatever weapons they could gather. The king himself gave them the tools they needed to carry out their mission, a sense of responsibility and urgency driving the decision. They were to defend their homes and restore peace to the land. The moon hung high in the night sky, casting pale light over the village. The vigilante force had been on watch for several nights now, but the thieves, once bold and reckless, had grown cautious, hiding in the shadows. Their hunger was growing, but they feared the consequences of breaking the law the king had set. But on this night, driven by desperation, the thieves made their move. They emerged from the darkness, sneaking through the village under the cover of night, seeking anything they could steal to satisfy their hunger. The vigilantes, alert and waiting, spotted them almost immediately. There was no need for words. Each man knew his role. They moved swiftly, surrounding the thieves in the darkness, their machetes gleaming under the moonlight. A tense silence filled the air, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant chirps of nighttime creatures. As the first thief turned to flee, one of the vigilantes, Chukwu, lunged. The clash of machetes rang through the air. The fight was brutal, no weapons, no guns, just raw strength and desperate determination. The vigilantes fought fiercely, using the skills they had honed over years of hard work, while the thieves fought back with the same desperation that had brought them to this point. The battle raged for several minutes, the sounds of steel clashing against steel, grunts of exertion, and harsh breaths filling the night. 3 thieves fell, their bodies crumpling to the ground, blood staining the earth beneath them. The others fled into the shadows, disappearing into the night. 1 thief, however, was captured. Bound and brought forward, he was dragged to the village square, where Chief Abadike and the vigilantes waited, their faces grim. The crowd gathered, drawn by the noise of the conflict, their eyes wide with fear and curiosity. The captured thief was brought before the chief, who stood tall, his voice steady but full of authority. "This man has broken the law," Chief Abadike said, "and now he must pay the price." A heavy silence fell. The chief looked at the vigilantes, and one of them, Emeka, stepped forward, holding a large nail in his hand. The crowd watched, their faces tense with a mix of fear and curiosity. Some turned their heads, unable to watch what was about to happen, while others stood frozen, eyes locked on the scene. The thief's head was forced down, his forehead exposed. Emeka positioned the nail in the center of his skull, the cold metal gleaming in the moonlight. With a swift motion, the nail was driven into his head. The sound was sickening, a sharp, echoing thud that seemed to resonate through the still night air. The thief's body jerked violently, but he made no sound. He had no chance to escape. His fate was sealed, and the law had been carried out. The crowd stood in stunned silence as Chief Abadike spoke again, his voice heavy with finality. "This is the price of breaking the law," the chief said. "Let this be a lesson to all who think they can steal from us." The crowd began to disperse, some with uneasy expressions, others with a sense of grim satisfaction. The first execution had taken place, and the village would never be the same again. The village had changed. What was once a place of trust and peace had now become a town gripped by fear. King Nemeka's law had altered the way people lived, and every evening, the town crier, Obioma, ran through the streets, announcing the gathering for the night's grim event. The community now knew that the consequences for stealing were deadly. The first execution was shocking. A man named Ease had been caught sneaking into a field, attempting to steal crops that didn't belong to him. The crowd gathered, eyes filled with a mix of fear and sorrow, as they watched Ease's fate unfold. His pleas for mercy went unanswered, and with the cold thud of a nail driven into his forehead, life was taken. The crowd stood in silence, the reality settling in that this was their new world. Soon after, another man, Chidi, was caught taking livestock. His hands trembled as he was dragged before the crowd, his eyes filled with regret. But there was no turning back. The punishment was clear. The execution was swift. The crowd looked on, their hearts heavy, knowing the law was being carried out, but at what cost? The village was no longer a place where doors were left open or goods were left with price tags. The free-flowing trust was gone. Now, the market was watched carefully, and doors were locked. Fear had settled in like a permanent shadow. One night, a woman named Nkem was caught sneaking fish from the market. Her family wept, knowing the consequences that awaited her. The law was cruel, but it was justice, as the nail was driven into her forehead. There was no forgiveness, no room for compassion. The town had become a place where stealing was simply not worth the risk. A man named Emeka was caught one evening trying to steal from a neighbor's barn. His hands were covered in the blood of his crime, and the crowd, already hardened by so many executions, watched as he, too, faced the same fate. As the deaths continued, something changed. The once bustling market fell silent. People no longer left their goods unattended, no longer trusted the open doors that once defined their peaceful way of life. They became watchful, suspicious. The air was thick with fear, and the once vibrant village now felt like a shadow of itself. But stealing began to decrease. The price was too high. The nail that had ended so many lives was a grim reminder to all. By the time 10 executions had taken place, and 20 followed soon after, stealing became a rare occurrence. The law had worked, but at a devastating cost. The village had become a safer place, but the freedom, the warmth, the trust once shared was now gone. People kept to themselves, their doors locked, and their markets guarded. The village was safe, but it was no longer the same. One day, a widow named Adora, known across the village for her gentle heart and quiet strength, was struck with the worst news a mother could hear. Her only son, Obi, had been caught stealing. The boy had made a mistake, maybe out of hunger, maybe out of weakness, but the law was clear. That morning, Obioma's voice rang through the paths, announcing the execution. The widow rushed to King Nemeka's palace, barefoot, her wrapper barely tied around her. Her voice broke as she cried before the king. "My king, please, this is the only child I have. Let me take his place. Let me pay with my life or with my hands. Please don't take him from me." The elders, Abadaik, Yuzo, and Matsikalu, stood by, silent, some with tears in their eyes. A few dared to plead quietly, "This is a mother's last hope. My king, let mercy speak." But the king's face was heavy. His heart battled itself. 20 thieves had already died by the law. If he bent it now, what would the people say? Would justice be justice if it only favored the loudest tears? So he looked away. That evening, the whole village gathered in silence. Adora's cries pierced the air as Obi was brought out. When the nails struck, many in the crowd flinched, turned their faces, or wept quietly. The sound of her scream stayed with them longer than the hammer strike. From that day, the village was never the same. People moved with heavy hearts. Children played less. Even laughter in the evening became soft and unsure. The people began to question everything. Was this the peace they wanted? A peace built on blood? Pity grew like smoke in the hearts of the crowd. They pitied Adora, yes, but also the others. So many deaths. So many mothers left with silence in their homes. So many families torn. The cost of the law began to feel unbearable. Talk started. Quiet ones at first. "This law is too hard," they said. "We are safe, but are we still whole?" Ideas came. Maybe thieves should pay back what they stole. Maybe they should work it off. Some elders offered the idea of payment, 7 times the worth of what was taken. But King Nemeka still held on, his eyes shadowed by the weight of all he had already done. And the village waited, aching for a change. It was a bright, sunny morning, the kind of day when the world seemed to promise peace, when birds sang and the sun smiled down on the land. But that morning, the kingdom would never be the same again. Prince Obinna, the king's son, had been caught stealing. The vigilante group, led by Ikin, found him in the market square, crouched near the open stalls. His hands trembled as he slipped a piece of bread into his coat. It wasn't just any bread. It was the best loaf from Mama Ebra's baker's stall, the one with the golden crust that everyone in the village knew. The prince, unaware of the watchful eyes, was caught in the act. The guards, shocked and confused, could hardly believe it. This wasn't some common thief. It was Prince Obinna, the young man meant to lead them, the symbol of their ideals. A hush fell over the crowd. The prince's face was pale, his eyes wide with panic. He didn't fight back. He didn't even try to deny it. There he stood, frozen in shame. The stolen bread was all he took, but to the kingdom, it was more than just bread. It was a betrayal of trust, a crack in the foundation holding everything together. The vigilantes stood silently, torn between their loyalty to the crown and the law they had sworn to uphold. After a tense conversation, they decided the truth must be revealed, no matter how painful. They kept Prince Obinna hidden, their hearts heavy as they made their way to King Nemeka's chambers. Their footsteps echoed louder than usual, as if the very ground mourned what was to come. Bowing their heads, they spoke softly to the king. "The prince, my lord, he was caught stealing the bread from Mama Ebra's stall." King Nemeka, a man who had always stood strong, felt the air knocked from his lungs. His own son, the boy he had raised with love, the future king, had broken the law. A wave of nausea swept over him. How could this happen? How could Prince Obinna, his own flesh and blood, do something so dishonorable? The king's heart shattered, but his duty remained clear. He had enforced the law for years. His son must face the consequences. Days passed in agonizing silence. King Nemeka couldn't sleep. or eat. In their chambers, Queen Attiku sat beside him, her face pale and eyes wet with sorrow. She whispered, voice trembling, "Please, my love, he is our son. There must be another way. We've given this kingdom everything, and he only stole bread." But the king, though torn apart inside, stood firm. The law was clear. His hands trembled as he prepared for what was to come. How could he choose between duty and love? How could he condemn his own child? At last, King Nemeka stood before Prince Obinna in the village square. The villagers gathered, their faces filled with confusion, anger, and sadness. They had once looked up to the prince, but now watched in disbelief as he was led to the center, shackled in shame. Though his soul was breaking, the king could not show it. He raised his hand and, with a heavy heart, ordered the execution, the punishment demanded by law. The nail was driven into his son's head, sealing not only the prince's fate, but his own. The sound of the nail striking echoed in the stillness, a sound that would haunt King Nemeka forever. Prince Obinna fell, lifeless, to the ground. The king's eyes burned with grief, but he shed no tears. He stood motionless, his heart an empty void. That night, while the kingdom slept, King Nemeka wandered the palace halls. The weight of his decision crushed him. Alone in the darkness, he finally let himself weep. Not for the kingdom or the law, but for his son. Queen Attiku watched from the doorway, whispering, "You've lost a son today, but you've also lost yourself." The king did not respond. How could he? He felt as though he had died alongside Obinna. The law had taken his son, but it had also taken a part of his soul. The next day, King Nemeka stood in the castle's tallest tower, looking down on his city and people. His heart was heavy, but within it stirred something new, a sense of clarity, understanding. The law had been too unforgiving, too cold, too rigid. "I cannot live with this," he whispered to the breeze. "There must be another way." He summoned the elders, Abadaik, Yuzo, and Matsi Kalu, the chiefs and advisors. Their discussions were long, tense, filled with heated debate. Yet, King Nemeka's voice, shaped by grief and wisdom, prevailed. The law would be changed. No more executions. No more death for thieves, no matter their station. The elders and chiefs welcomed the king's decision with relief and joy, seeing it as a step toward healing. When the new rule was announced, the people rejoiced. Instead of death, anyone caught stealing would repay the person they wronged 7 times over. The villagers, witnessing the fairness and mercy of the new law, praised their king's wisdom. Fear began to lift, replaced by hope and trust. The village, once shrouded in dread, began to breathe again. King Nemeka stood alone, gazing at the city he had loved and ruled. The setting sun painted the sky red and gold. Though the weight of the past lingered, he felt it lift, ever so slightly. But his heart, though lighter, would never be the same. And so the king, once a man of strict, unyielding justice, was forever changed. Word spread beyond the hills and rivers. The village was safe again. Strangers, and those who had left long ago, began returning. With steady steps and hopeful hearts, they crossed the fields and trails, drawn by the promise of a place to rebuild. Children laughed joyfully as they ran ahead, their voices ringing clear through the air. Mothers walked gently behind them, carrying infants wrapped in colorful cloth, exchanging warm greetings with old friends and neighbors. The sunlight caught on their smiles, painting the scene with hope and renewal. No longer a place of fear, the village had become a home to reclaim. King Nemeka watched from his high vantage point, his eyes tracing the paths of those returning. The vibrant life unfolding before him was both a comfort and a reminder. Though peace had returned, the echoes of past decisions lingered in his soul. The king knew that while the village could heal and grow, his own path had been forever altered, marked by the weight of justice tempered now with wisdom and compassion. Thanks for watching. I hope you are enjoying this video. Creating each video takes me a very long time and a lot of energy. From writing the script, carefully selecting and placing images, to editing every detail and finally uploading. It's a whole process done with passion, just for you. If you enjoy the video, you can support me by subscribing, commenting, liking, or sharing. It won't cost you anything. It's completely free. At the end, please score the video from 0 to 10, where 0 is the lowest and 10 is the highest. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what you liked, what could be better, and what you think should be added or removed. Your feedback while you watch means the world to me and helps me keep making content you love. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to bring you more great videos soon.